Functional tool calling is when our agent doesn't have the information it needs, but we need it when we're making a query. For example, it's got to make a request to some external tool. It could be a request to our database, to an API, or some functions that we've got. And what we need to do is to be able to provide a way that the LLM can tell us, I need more information. This is the function that you've told me you have. Run it with these arguments and send me back the information so I can append it to all my messages and give you an answer. And the best way to show this is actually to have a look at this example. This is O3 OpenAI tool calling, and I put in a lot of console.logs to explain what's going on. But if we're in here, for example, if we want to know what is the weather, we've given it a particular function called getWeather, and it can then respond by asking us to run it, and we find the result and send it to them. So we can see here there was a call for getWeather. It knew that we have this function getWeather. How does it know that? Let's go back into the code. If you can see, we've got a list of tools that we have a schema for, that we're defining what tools are available for the LLM and how it should tell us that it needs them. So the tool is a function. We have a getWeather function name, a description so that the LLM can actually know which tool to pick. This is how it decides which tool it needs to pick. Whether there are any parameters, for example, in the getSum, it's calculate the sum of two numbers. It has the arguments that it's needed, the name of the function. So if we ask a question like what is 7 plus 5, it knows it has a tool because it intelligently has been told that there is a tool that can calculate the sum of two numbers. So it can then send back to us the name of the function and the name of the parameters for us to run to make the information and send it on. And we see that in the tool calling here. First off, it asks for the getWeather. We give it the result. It knows that it needs no more tools, so it can then give us the final answer. So if we see in here, if we close this down and run this one more time, let's do what is 2 plus 5. When we send this, it's going to the LLM knows that it has this function called getSum, so it's telling us run getSum with 2 and 5 and send me back the result. Our result of that is the sum of 2 plus 5 is 7. It sends that back as part of the messages in the prompt chain, and then the AI assistant can now create the answer. The sum of 2 and 5 is 7. Now let's do what is the weather in France today. We're using our fake API, getWeather, and if you also have another question as well, and what is 5 plus 5, it knows it needs to run the getWeather function, it knows it needs to run the getSum, and when I say it knows it needs to run, what I'm really saying is that actually it's coming back to us and saying, you've told me that you have this function of getWeather, run it for me, add the result into the system prompt effectively into the prompt chain, and then I can got that information, I can return an answer. And this is this sort of React pattern loop that we can see here of going round, constantly adding extra information to the prompt chains, to the messages, because it's an array, and then the final time it can actually give us the answer. So coming back to the explainer, we have a user query. The AI, the LLM analyzes it. Part of our prompt has been saying we have two tools. If you need them, tell us which one you need. It calls for it. We run the code. We return that result to the AI, appended to what the original question, and then it can answer its final response. So if we say, what's the weather like in Paris? The AI thinks, I need this weather. I should get the getWeather tool because we've told it we have that tool. We don't have a location for Paris, but it could have a function parameter. It runs that function. Sorry, it asks us to run that function. We run it in our code in traditional programming, but we now append that to the system or user prompt, and then with that information, it can produce the final result, which is it's currently 18 degrees and sunny in Paris. So it's always about defining the tools, and it has to form this schema. So we're sending this extra information as part of our system prompt, so it knows that if it needs to run a tool, it can. And it could be a call to a database, which we'll see later on in our plugins, or an API, or doing a mathematical function. And basically, again, we just add in the AI bit when we're sending it to the OpenAI, whereas before we were sending our messages, we're also adding tools that are available so that it can then tell us if we need to run a certain tool to get extra information that gets sent back once again on the second time to the model. So a little bit convoluted in some ways, and when we use libraries, we don't have to use this schema. We can basically just have a certain notation with our functions, and it's much cleaner and simpler. And that's why libraries like LangChain and OpenAI agents make things a lot easier, because we don't have to do this heavy boilerplate of writing this type of code. We can just define a function, effectively decorate it or wrap it with another function, and it will know that it can then find that tool based on the description. And the description is very important because it's how the LLM knows which tool to call. If we didn't have this here, if we said this is a function that produces stock prices, it wouldn't get it. It's not the name that gives it the indication of what function. It's this description which it reads and says, oh, okay, you've got a current weather for a location, or you've got perform a mathematical calculation. So that is tool calling. We'll see this later on as we go through the plugins. For example, when we see up here O3 tool use, we'll go through a plugin that actually has tool use in a different way. And in fact, what I'll do is while I'm here, why don't we actually see that in action in our site? So we've got tool use. We set our key. We have the get weather tool. We have a math tool. These are the available tools. So I can ask, what is the weather? And you'll see here, it's going through. It knows it needs to do a tool execution. It knows it needs to get weather, and it gives us the final result. And in the same way as if we ask for 3 plus 4, it's going to determine that it's going to need the sum tool. Add two numbers. That's the function with the parameters, and it gives us the result. So when we see that plugin later on, what we'll be able to do is then use the result of this in the next step. But this is explaining tool call and how it's a way that we can tell an LLM that we've got functions on our server that if it needs more information, ask us. It's very much like if a new person comes to work. You may say, look, if you need any further information, just ask me for this report or this database. I'll get it for you, give you the extra information, and you can carry on with your work. It's that looping round that may be twice, 3 times, 4 times, until a final call comes when, as we saw, the LLM says, I don't need any more